Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Celtic Way morning briefing. It's Monday, the 1st of September. Despite there being no yellow ties on for both Kevin and I, it's transfer deadline day. It's also just under 24 hours since Celtic's nothing each draw, 0-0 draw with Rangers at Ibrox. We've got plenty to discuss this morning, hoping for a busy day today in the transfer window before it shuts at 11 p.m. tonight. First of all, before we get into talking about all of the talking points, I'd like to introduce Kevin McKenna. Kevin, how you doing this morning? How you feeling after yesterday? Bit of an open question there, but how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. I'm good. I was there yesterday, and the feeling, quite often when you react to something adverse, you give it 24 hours and you start looking for the positives. Well, that hasn't happened yet because I didn't really see. Well, I saw one positive, but we'll talk about that later. But I've been going to these games for decades, loads at Ibrox, and dear oh dear, that was as bad as I've ever seen between both teams.
Yeah, when Brendan Rodgers is coming out and saying that it was a hard watch yesterday, then you know it was a pretty terrible game. If you want to see the full reaction of the Celtic Ways reaction to the nothing each draw with Rangers, we've got the videos that are available as well. But we'll go back in and talk about the game. It was a pretty drab affair. Both teams really looking out of sorts. Rangers have looked out of sorts all season. Celtic the past couple of games have looked quite, especially in Europe, they've looked quite bereft of ideas, to be honest, and that's what transpired yesterday. It was a game of very little quality. I won't go too much into the statistical side of things, but there was a famous account online that was talking about XG and expected goals, and it was the lowest expected goals they've ever covered for a game, and that would make sense. That after watching that game, you would understand why the expected goals were so low, because it was a game of very little quality, little chances. Apart from John Souttar putting the ball in the back of the net, which was called quite rightly for offside. A couple of speculative efforts from Celtic here, and Tierney overhead kick that Jack Butland saved quite comfortably, and Hatate from range that again Butland saved comfortably. There was nothing to write home about. Rangers didn't get a shot on target that was officially registered. Celtic's chances were few and far between. It was just a poor day all round, wasn't it, Kevin? It was a really poor game for both sides, and a really bad advert for Scottish football as well, that being their showcase game.
Yeah, that's now Celtic have now played 3.5 hours without scoring, but not only that. I mean, I'm talking also about the 120 minutes against in Kazakhstan.
FC Kairat.
We were. I remember watching that game against Kairat and thinking at halftime, right, okay, well, we need to chase this. We need to kind of start moving it around a bit more. We need a bit more pace, just urgency, because you know that Kairat Almaty are not going to. They're looking for penalties. 120 minutes. Then Rangers, who haven't won a game in the league all season. And you know that they would be delighted with a draw. You know their manager's going to be delighted with a draw because it buys them a little bit more time. And similarly, at halftime, I'm thinking, right, I know that a couple of Rangers-facing commentators said, oh, we were great in the first half, or they were the better team. They weren't. Rangers went back to a 1970s way of playing. Get the ball up as quickly as possible at the front, hoof it, look for any second balls, and rely on the referee giving us fouls for every time a Rangers player goes to ground, shies and corner kicks. That was it. That was their entire threat. The fact they didn't have a shot and goal tells you its own story. So I'm thinking, well, Celtic now know after 45 minutes, they've got nothing. They're not going to threaten them. They simply do not have the ball players. They don't have the pace. They're not as fit as Celtic. Let's go to town here. And also Celtic can afford to take a few more risks simply by dint of the fact that they're 6 points ahead. They can put Rangers, they can more or less win the title. Nine games, 9 points ahead, we would have been after 4 games. Rangers wouldn't be coming back from that. and that's not insulting the other clubs, because I actually think Hibs, if they can steer clear of injuries, could give both of us
Hearts as well, yeah. Hearts are level
maybe
points.
Hearts. And it was, I mean, it's just as bad as it got. I mean, you could go through the entire team, Ryan. I mean, Big Schmeichel, I don't know what it was. Well, maybe he was bored because he knew that he wasn't going to be tested, and he thought, I'll just introduce my own drama here. Kieran Tierney, I'm beginning to have big worries there. Yeah, I know that, we're just kind of jockeying him, 60, 65 minutes. Because he has a lot of pace in his game, and he hadn't been playing for a long time. Although he did start, did he not, a couple of Arsenal's last few games last season?
Yeah, a couple at the end.
But he's lost pace. We know that. The opposition know that. The only players I would give pass marks to were Scales, who I thought was outstanding.
Yes,
and I know his distribution. I know his distribution's not great. He doesn't have that. But my God, the big guy tries. I mean, he puts his body on the line. Where we were sitting behind the in the Broomloan stand, you could actually see him straining every sinew just to get balls out of that box or to prevent a ball breaking to a Rangers player. Tony Ralston was good. Tony Ralston,
I thought so too. I know he got a lot of stick online, but I thought he put in a really hard shift.
If you look at all the games he's played against Rangers, and he's played against them quite a few times, quite often in adverse circumstances where he's been brought in. I remember, I think, a semi-final at Hampden a couple of years ago when Alistair Johnson was injured quite early on. Tony Ralston steps up for Celtic every time we play Rangers, no matter what. Ibrox, Hampden, Parkhead, and he was good. Engels, I know he was substituted. I couldn't understand why he was substituted. That told me that Brendan Rodgers was happy with the draw, because he was the only one I thought who was trying to turn the ball, trying to unlock, trying to find that pocket of space behind the defence. Wasn't always happening, but he was trying. Hatate might as well have been sitting with us. I just got the impression after 10, 15 minutes he just wasn't up for it.
Here's a question for you, Kevin. Do you think that the game potentially needed Bernardo earlier in the midfield, but he didn't come off the bench?
Yep, Bernardo likes to pick the ball up and run, as we saw in the cup final last year. He likes to drive at defences. He would have tried something, and also the fact that he hasn't featured this season much. I think if he'd come off the bench, he's thinking, right, I want to make my stamp. I want to make my mark in this. I want to send out a message to Brendan Rodgers that I'm your man. And he would have been he would have tried to have been more dynamic. I'll absolve Negrin from any criticism because he's playing as a winger. He started. He's not a winger. And when he moved inside in the last 15 minutes, things began to happen.
I thought he looked like Celtic's most dangerous player when he moved into the middle of the park.
Yeah. Maeda, similarly, I know he scored a lot of goals last season, but he's not a striker. We all know what this is a consequence of. Celtic go into their first big game of the season against Rangers at Ibrox with no recognised striker and no recognised right winger, unless you count James Forrest. But it's not fair in James Forrest. He's 3 or 4 years. He's 3 or 4 years beyond his best.
That's after injuries as well, which have
and it's not. It's just not fair, because we risk putting him on and him not playing well or not catching the pace, and then his kind of legacy, if you like, although I hate that word, being disfigured, because we will remember too many, young fans who are maybe just starting off watching Celtic will just remember their memories of James Forrest will be of, a winger who struggled in the games that they saw him in. You have to remember this. you have to question Brendan Rodgers too, because those players have been quite obviously told. I mean, there was several times, you'll have seen it, we all saw it, where there was the possibility of playing the kind of slide rule pass, slightly risky, but opening up space. And because it carried a small element of risk of losing possession, we turned back. Now that's not instinctively how they would want to play. All that to the amount of times. I'd love to see the stats on how many times the ball went backwards from us. That must come from Brendan Rodgers. Caution, sideways back. And you're playing against a team can't hurt you. Rangers can't hurt you. 45 minutes. That will have been their best 45 minutes of the season, and they still didn't get a shot on target.
I tweeted that out at half time, Kevin. I thought that was Russell Martin's easiest 45 minutes as a Rangers manager. I've watched a lot of Rangers this season, and I will admit to that because I want to see how Celtic's biggest rivals are doing. I think it's important to keep a close eye on what rivals are doing. Watched a bit of Hearts as well, for that matter. And that was the easiest 45 minutes they've played as a team, because Celtic didn't lay a glove on them at all. It was so easy for them. They had a lot of the ball. There was moments. There was about a 10-minute period in the first half where Celtic were actually passing the ball about, and they had possession of the ball. And the stat came down, and it was down in the lower left-hand side of Sky Sports, and it said that Celtic had something like 72% possession. But that's all well and good, but they did absolutely nothing with the ball. They're just passing the ball about aimlessly, this sort of horseshoe pattern, trying to make something happen. But none of the passes were penetrating the Rangers midfield or defensive line, and yeah, it was pretty comfortable for Rangers despite Celtic having all that possession. They were doing nothing with it, and it was possession, but it wasn't meaningful possession.
And there were 2 or 3 times in the first half where Balikwisha was, had space to run at Tavernier. I just didn't do it. And, I would never judge a player on his first appearance, especially against Rangers at Ibrox. But you can't escape the possibility, and I'm happy to be proved wrong here if somebody knows otherwise, that Balikwisha's been told, don't try anything. The name of the game here is to keep possession, not to give anything away. He's a winger. We paid £5 million for a winger from a good, level of football, and not once, maybe one. There was once he tried to take on his marker. Now we're told he's got pace. We've got pace. He's got pace to burn. He's got half decent, goal statistics. Where was that?
And why didn't he go up against James Tavernier, a player who we all know is not a very good defender, a good attacker, a good attacking fullback, and the numbers speak for themselves. You cannot deny that. But defensively, he has been caught out a number of times, and yet Balikwisha did not attack his man.
Well, one, the only positive I can take away from this is that after 4 games, we haven't conceded a goal. We're 6 points ahead of the club that we expect to be our closest rivals, and we've got 3 games left against them in the League 2, which are at Celtic Park. However, despite the fact that Rangers are not good and haven't been good for a couple of years, we haven't beaten them. In fact, the last 5 games, I think we've beaten them once under normal circumstances.
That's once in a year. 365 days it was exactly a year ago. Celtic beat them in 90 minutes.
We failed to do much against them when they've been managed by 2 rookie managers, including Barry Ferguson last year. Yep. The cup final could have gone either way. I'm not counting that as an out-and-out victory, but obviously you take it. But that's got to be concerning. I tweeted last night that was probably the worst Glasgow Derby I'd seen. I can remember a couple of shocking games in the early to mid 1980s when Rangers really were in the doldrums. I think there was a 0-0 game I went to at Ibrox. There was one at Parkhead as well. But these are two teams who spent a lot of money. Celtic are full of internationals. They're full of millionaires, let's face it, okay. They're full of good players drawn from across Europe. And you can't land a finger, can't land a punch, first of all, on a team, Kairat Almaty, who were ranked around 300 places below you in UEFA. You can't land a punch on them over, 3.5 hours? And you have two insipid shots on target against not a good, and I'm not going to say they're a bad Rangers team. It's not fair, but they're not good. They're weak. I'm sure they'll improve as the season goes on. They have to. But at the moment, Rangers are very, very weak. And we couldn't land a punch on them. And the manager, we need to start talking about the manager, because I heard his interview after the game, and my first instinct, he doesn't want to be here. He's lost interest. He seems to have lost interest.
Why don't we go in and speak about his comments, because I've got them right in front of me just now. I'll read them out. Obviously we didn't have the quotes to hand after the game, but I've got them all here. I transcribed them after the game. So every word of Brendan Rodgers' press conference is on the Celtic Way. I will just put the link into the comments if you want to have a wee closer look at them. That should be them in the comments section now. But I'll read some of them out. So he was asked, how do you reflect on today's game, Brendan? He said, I thought it was a poor game, if I'm being brutally honest. The positive for us being we haven't given away much over the course of pre-season and the season so far. And today I don't think we had a shot against us on target. So defensively, we've been good and solid and showed lots of endeavour, which is great. But the actual quality in the game was not at the level I'd expect a Celtic team to be. So that was a disappointment. But I felt overall the quality of the game wasn't at a high enough level. He was then asked, why do you think the team has been quite blunt today and in those two legs against Kairat as well? Sadly, it's about the profile of player, he replied. I think that it's very clear on that. As I said, we're getting lots of work. Guys are working well and working hard, and sometimes in teams, whenever you don't quite have that feeling going into a game that you can score goals, and like we were this period last year, which was plentiful. So the team then goes in with a different energy and a different feeling, which then sparks everything off and brings that energy and that real game attitude that you want. When you're lacking that, then that's sometimes what you get. I'm going to then go on further to when he's talking about the Celtic DNA. He was saying, I'm guessing, so somebody asked him saying, I'm guessing the next 24 hours are going to be big, Brendan, in terms of what you want to achieve this season. He said, well, yeah, I feel it is. It's something that's been so clear what the team is needed and what's required, and I really hope that in this period we can do that, because like I say, Celtic's DNA is about their attacking intent, mentality and that bit of quality, and when you arrive in the final third and you're creating chances, 12 months ago, the dynamism in the team and the speed and the creativity, everything was there, and then you feel you can go into games and be really dynamic and creative, and that's what we all want to see. So when it's a wee bit like that there today, then it's not a great watch. I actually took the time before we came on today, Kevin, and watched the game from 365 days ago. It was a 3-0 win against Rangers at Celtic Park, and Celtic were dynamite, helped by the fact that they had players like Kyogo and Nicholas Kuhn in their team, two players that did it in that derby against Rangers on that day, and did it beforehand in the derby against Rangers. Those players aren't there to be seen, and the players that came into the side did not have the desired effect, or the effect that those two players had. So what do you make of those comments, Kevin, and just in general what Brendan Rodgers has had to say? Because it's a little bit worrying if he's talking about the team going into a Glasgow Derby thinking that they can't score goals.
I know. First of all, I think a lot of it is just mindless waffle and jargon. You don't say that after a game against Rangers. How can you say that you've gone into that game knowing that you're better than them, playing, player for player, and hint or suggest or imply that you weren't yourself confident of scoring, against them or making many chances against them. And yeah, I take your point that this time last year we beat Rangers 3-0. We played some good football.
They had the personnel, they had the personnel, but there was also just that bit more dig in the team as well. Watching and the speed in which Celtic were playing at a year ago compared to now, they're it's as if someone's taking all the pace out of Celtic and all the power and precision. And what we saw the remnants today or yesterday of what's left of that team.
And I know we say, well, we've lost Kyogo, we've lost Kuhn, Jota's injured, but that in itself doesn't explain I'm not going to say cowardice, but the fearfulness of Celtic's performance and the slow pace, because in our 25-man pool, we've got the best players in the country. We've got the best group of players in the country by a distance. There's pace in that, and that squad, in that team. There's creativity, there's tactical awareness, there's experience, there's a winning mentality. They've won trophies. Most of them have got great CVs. We've got a good captain. I'm not buying this that he's over the hill. He's barely 30. So we've got all them. We've got a massive fan base who turn out week in, week out. So the backing's there. They haven't lost faith. So almost all of the ingredients, minus two players who've gone, are still there. And I know we should have gone in. We shouldn't have been in a position of getting into first game of the season against Rangers, minus a recognised striker, minus a recognised winger. But still, that doesn't explain the sheer insipid nature of that performance. The fear that stalked it throughout doesn't explain it. There still should have been much more dynamism. There still should have been more pace. There still should have been a bit more bravery. There was no bravery in that team, apart from Scales, who he came to Celtic's rescue with headed clearances. He came to Schmeichel's rescue, apart from Ralston. And I have to say, I haven't mentioned him before, but I thought Shin Yamada, when he came on, gave us a bustling, proper centre forwards display. He did what you would expect. He tried to hold the ball up. He was manhandled all the time. The referee was allowing all sorts of challenges to go on him. Picked himself back up, went again, made himself a nuisance. He can be pleased with himself. That's it.
I would agree. I really enjoyed Shin Yamada's performance. There was a slight chance, maybe a bit of a half chance that he had when James Forrest played the ball into him that I don't think. Maybe it was a little bit of a mixture of the pass being too strong and Yamada potentially being on his heels. But if he was on his heels, that was the only time he was on his heels, because he worked hard at Ibrox. He didn't look scared or intimidated at the place that he was playing in. I thought he was quite bright.
I should also say, Jamesy, when he came on, was good.
But that's where Celtic are at the moment, Kevin. They're relying on a 34-year-old winger to give them width out wide, and that's a little bit concerning, in my opinion. So just in terms of, and I know we've spent quite a lot of time talking about the Glasgow Derby, which is understandable given it was yesterday. Now all the focus turns to the deadline day, and it's 11 o'clock that the window shuts until January. Kevin, I'm just going to make it as easy a question as possible, or depending on how you answer it might be more complicated, I'm not sure. But where does Celtic need to strengthen today in order to be ready for the rest of the season? You've watched what they produced yesterday, you've watched what they've produced all over this season so far, both home and away, both domestically and in Europe. Where do they need to improve today, and how many deals do they need to get done to make this an acceptable window?
We need a striker. We need a recognised striker. first and foremost, and we need a right winger. We probably need somebody else on the left. I still think we need an enforcer in the midfield, but I don't think we're going to get that because
No.
the board and Brendan Rodgers will look at how many midfielders we already have. And by the way, you're right to ask about Bernardo, but we'll leave that to another time. But we need a winger, we need a striker. That's the minimum. That's the minimum. And that they have to be got over the line today.
Can I just bring up a wee comment somebody's put into the live chat? Sorry. So Paddy says the window shuts at 7. It does. It shuts in England at 7. And I nearly made this mistake yesterday. I thought I was going to be getting an early night tonight. I thought the window was going to shut at 7 as well. The Scottish transfer window shuts at 11 o'clock. So there's 4 hours of a difference. Now, here's a question for you, Kevin, or a suggestion maybe. Do you think that those 4 hours of difference from 7 to 11 could allow Celtic to get some late deals done if things fall through down in England, if they're proactive and reactive as well? If a deal was to, say, for example, fall through at the last minute and a player's stuck in a situation that they don't necessarily want to be in, could Celtic offer themselves as a haven for a player to make a quick move ahead of the end of the transfer window?
Yeah, it's a possibility. Would you trust this board with that level of acuity, of preparedness, of research, of attention to detail? No, you wouldn't, would you? I mean, I know Michael Nicholson takes a lot of criticism, although I think the criticism's misdirected because being the chief executive officer of Celtic isn't like being the chief executive officer of any other company. You're basically a very, very overpaid senior clerk. And at Celtic, because of the ownership structure, because of the decision-making structure. But you wonder, if you're talking about this, and it's a really, really good point, you just hope somebody else might be talking about it. But then you say it's, then you look at our reputation. Celtic, massive club, great history, lots of money in the bank, so-called elite manager. Should we be scrabbling around, taking advantage of time differentials?
That's my worry, Kevin. I'll be honest. I think they're creating a new reputation for themselves, if I'm being perfectly honest, as a team or as an organisation and a business and a board that scrimp around and wait to the last minute, and then they're desperate, and then they're held to ransom by other clubs because they know that they're desperate for players. That's my main concern. That this new...
There's another consequence of this. If we get Kasper Dolberg over the line, it will probably be in the region of £8.5–9 million. I don't think Kasper Dolberg's worth that. I think he's probably, maybe £5–6 million player. Likewise with Adam Ida. Adam Ida wasn't worth 9 million. He's a £4–5 million player. Now the consequence of that for these players, and we've seen it with Adam Ida, is that you're then deliberately heaping unnecessary pressure on that player, because when Adam Ida, all strikers go through a lean period. So they need as little, they don't need any extra pressure. But when Adam Ida goes through a lean period, he's not just the Celtic striker that's finding it difficult to get goals. He's the £9 million Celtic striker, and the boy feels that as well. And it's not right. It's not fair. We were kind of, because of the strategy, the car crash that we've seen in the transfer window this time around, we were forced into paying more than we should have for a striker who wasn't worth 9 million, who had the opportunity, if he'd played well for a few seasons, to then be transferred for 20, 25 million. But
Look at
I
what's
just
happening with
felt
O at Genk.
just mental. So that again, that's we have this reputation. Celtic cash rich, the fans, any European team, because of social media, they are all across where Celtic are at the moment. We can get an extra couple of £1 million here. Agents are alerted. This team are under pressure at home by the press, the fans, by not getting into the Champions League. We've got a chance of Scotland another couple of million out of this. We've got the chance of chucking them a player who they would normally look at and fill in their boots. That's Celtic's reputation. That's the reputation they have amongst our own support base. And you might have somebody who's loyal to the board or a director saying, how can you know that? You don't know what it's like. Well, that is the reputation that Celtic are gaining within their own fan base. So it's reasonable to suggest that clubs, executives, agents across Europe know that as well.
Yeah. Just want to bring up this comment from Loopy about Stuttgart laundering money to O and Genk. Stuttgart have got money. They've got a lot of money at the moment to spend, and Genk know that Stuttgart have a lot of money to spend because of Nick Voltemada's move to Newcastle for, I think it's £70 million, because that chain reaction that's happening just now with the striker position, with Isak now finally going to Liverpool, Newcastle signing replacements and Voltemada, and then that goes back to Stuttgart. Stuttgart have now got £70 million, or even more in euros, probably. Well, definitely, they've got even more in euros. So Genk, and this is just what happens in the transfer window. Genk know that Stuttgart need a striker, and they also know that they've got more money on their hands thanks to selling their striker for big money. So that's why his fee is inflated. No one can convince me that O is a £28 million striker. I've watched him in person. At some points, I think there would actually be a decimal point in between the 2 and the 8 for him after watching him. Despite me thinking that I did think he did have some good attributes, he's not a £28 million striker, but unfortunately, at the moment, he is, given the fact that Stuttgart want to pay that money. You're only worth as much as a team wants to pay for you, and at the moment, that's what £28 million will get you. So that's what Celtic are dealing with, and because of all these chain reactions, there's loads of teams now looking for strikers. There seems to be a real strikers market, a strikers shortage as well, which means that decent strikers will tend to get picked up late on in the window because they need to. That's my worry with Kasper Dolberg, I'll be honest, because nobody apart from Borussia Mönchengladbach was linked with Dolberg. I've just got a funny feeling that today is going to be really, really difficult to get that deal done because of the amount of teams that need a striker. And he's a proven striker. He's scored goals in Europe basically wherever he's been, apart from a couple of bad loan spells at Hoffenheim and Sevilla. Everywhere else, he's scored goals for the teams that he's played for. So that's the problem that Celtic have got to negotiate in this window. Do you think that they'll sign Dolberg in this window? I'm just going to ask you straight, Kevin.
I couldn't tell you. For the reasons that you've just said, he's worthwhile. We should be going for somebody like him. But how often have we said this, Ryan? But we've known since January. We needed another striker. And here we are 8 months later on the last day of the transfer window, probably being bounced into a deal that will probably cost us 2 or 3 million more than we needed to. I can't tell you if we're going to get Kasper Dolberg. I suppose my instinct is that when you see Borussia Mönchengladbach being mentioned, and because they belong to a league where one of their, a middling sort of German team might be paying £28 million for O, where would you go? If it's if your agent's saying to you, by the way, Celtic, oh yeah, big team, I like the look of them.
And Ajax need a striker as well. Kevin, because they're selling their striker to Sunderland for 30 million.
Oh,
And Dolberg's been at Ajax before. That's
yeah.
where he started his career. So
I
that's another
remember.
potential
Remember him
hurdle.
there. So if you've got the choice between playing in the Scottish Premiership or the Bundesliga, where are you going to go?
Yeah.
Unless Celtic say to you, we're going to break our wage structure, we're going to pay you 50 grand a week. That's not going to happen, is it?
No. It would be disastrous if that happens, because that then causes turmoil with the players that are already
and
at the
it's
club,
not
because then there'll be about 5 people knocking on Brendan Rodgers and Michael Nicholson's door saying,
100%,
right, up my wages.
100%. And we're in this situation because of complacency, incompetence by the board, arrogance, call it what you will. And I know also that there's a lot of speculation, but we can't know because Celtic never tell you anything. We don't know what the relationship is between Brendan Rodgers and Peter Lawwell. We don't even know how much power Peter Lawwell has, because he's not got the same position as he had before. It's honorary. We don't know if Michael Nicholson has any agency, do we? Because we just don't know, because there's speculation about to what extent Dermot Desmond still runs the show. We don't even know the extent of that because he's not the owner.
There's no communication on that side of things.
So, when we criticise the board, all I see is like half a dozen names of people I would struggle to recognise who appear to be on a board of directors where they've got next to no influence. What's the point beyond taking up your annual emolument and your nice green blazer and your free 5-star trip to Europe 3 or 4 times a year? Well, why would you, unless you're really, really struggling for money, and these guys aren't, why would you humiliate yourself in exchange for a blazer and a few fancy continental trips to sit there knowing that nothing you say, nothing you do will make any difference? Now, that might not be the case. It might be very collegiate. There might be votes. They might all have little kind of areas of responsibility, research that I don't know about. But we just don't know. And this is what now? It's 12 hours, 12 hours to go. And we haven't even mentioned our UEFA Cup, our Europa League opponents, because, there will be some board loyalists who, if let's say Celtic don't do any business today, there will be people who will say, we'll still win the league though, because Rangers are so bad, and Hibs, who I really like the look of, dropped another 2 points yesterday. Hearts have been the luckiest team in Scotland. The amount of last-minute goals they've been getting and being outplayed by both Dundee United and Motherwell last week. Their bubble will burst. Aberdeen at the foot of the table. So, you went to a bookie and said, I want to put 10 grand on Celtic win the league. He's not going to take your bet because he knows they're going to win the league. But we've got 8 games against some quite tidy teams, starting with AS Roma. And again, it's the reputational damage. I'm looking at those 8 games and thinking 4 of them are winnable, 2 we could get a draw, and 2, if we play really, really well, we could get a draw or a win, right? Not with that squad. Not with that squad. And again, it's reputational damage. It's, and I could go on all day about this, right?
I think everybody could, and I think that's why we've got 1,500 people watching at this moment in time, which are incredible numbers for so early on in the day, and we hope that you can stay with us as long as possible today, whether that be on the YouTube. John and I will be doing a later video tonight discussing the transfer window as a whole. Looking forward to that one. I say with a little hint of sarcasm in my voice. John is also doing for his sons a live blog today, covering everything that happens in the transfer window, both in and out. That is in the description now. If you want to check that out, it'll be on until the dying embers of the transfer window, discussing everything that happens, transfer incomings, maybe some loan outgoings, some permanent outgoings as well. Still plenty to deal with on that front as well in terms of outgoings. Maybe that's something that we talk about before we end the show today in terms of outgoings. For me, there's about 4 or 5 players that are kind of stuck in a limbo at the moment, and it's not even just players that are going permanently with the likes of, it looks as if Adamida and Yang Hyun Jun are going to leave the club permanently today to Swansea and Birmingham City respectively, but there's also 2 or 3 players that are hanging about at the club that need their situation sorted for game time to progress their careers. I look no further than Stephen Welsh, an academy graduate that came through, and I think he made his debut coming back on loan from Morton in 2020, right before the pandemic hit. He then had not a starring role, but a main role in the COVID season. The Shane Duffy experiment was a disaster, and Celtic had to call upon one of the youngest players to come in and make something happen. Thought he did okay in that, given the circumstances. Had a few appearances under Ange. Brendan Rodgers doesn't seem to fancy him. He's got that constant shoulder injury worry. But his situation hasn't been sorted yet, and it's the final day of the transfer window. I just think for the good of his career, something needs to be sorted for Stephen Welsh, and I would add the same for the likes of Callum Osmond that needs a loan deal, because I don't really think he should be playing B team football. I think he should be playing Championship or lower end Scottish Premiership football, and there's a couple of other examples in there that need to be sorted out, but mostly in the case of Stephen Welsh, I just want to see his situation sorted.
No, I
and
agree.
Inamura as well, who Brendan Rodgers has said will need a loan deal because he won't get game time now that Sirachi's in the team. He needs a loan deal.
Yeah, clubs have a moral responsibility, I think, to how they look after players. And the upside of that is if they look after them well, again, it increases their reputation. We're dealing with young men, and we're dealing with their families and their families' hopes for these young men. And Stephen Welsh falls into that category. I remember, I think, did he make his debut in a game against Hamilton some years ago? He was brought in.
Did, yes. I think he,
and,
I remember
did
that.
well. And we love it when we see one of our own, just a young Scot who's been there for a while, gets his chance, takes it. And he did take it in that game. And, he doesn't have all the attributes. Over the piece, he's nothing to reproach himself for. And he's still got the best part of his career ahead of him. And we as a club, as a caring club that we like to think of ourselves as, should be doing everything in his best interests. And I really, really hope he gets a decent move to a club that will appreciate him, where he can show his skills, what he's trained for, his ambition. Adamida, I've got to say something about Adamida here. Because I see a lot of Celtic fans, giving him criticism, which I think is unfair. If Adamida leaves today, he's got, again, nothing to reproach himself for. He's paid a big chunk already of that transfer fee that I'd mentioned earlier. Very, very few players in either side of the Glasgow divide have had the privilege and honour of scoring the winning goal in a Glasgow Derby Cup final. You could count them in 2 hands. And he's won. And he scored 22 goals, was it, in his one full season? In the 6 months that we saw him at the end of the previous season, he scored crucial goals at crucial times. In crucial games for us. He scored a really good goal, which was another crucial goal at Ibrox. He scored against Young Boys, which took us into the knockout phases of the Champions League. The big fella has done a lot, and it didn't happen for him this season, and I think partly as a consequence of that price tag the expectations of the fans, the way that Brendan Rodgers sets his team up. He goes with my best wishes and thanks for the relatively short period of time he was with us. He gave us a good return, and that's official. And I'm not going.
And Celtic are still getting £6 million free services.
Yeah,
I mean, we say that. We say that, but he still might stay at the club if Celtic don't sign a striker today.
Yeah.
Now, he's completed the reports, the latest reports were that he's completed the second part of his medical. So I guess they're just waiting on a replacement being found and bought by Celtic before they can tick that off. 1 in, 1 out scenario. You're just hoping that Celtic can do that, because I think the last thing that they want is somebody to go that far, probably already done their first interview with their new club. You know how that works. I think we all remember how David Turnbull worked as well. He did his first interview, and then something came up in the medical, and then that was all scrapped. I don't think that'll be the problem if he does. He seems to be pretty fit and healthy past his medical. It's all about if Celtic can find a replacement in the coming hours. But the last thing I think they want is that deal to be cancelled. I think that would, and unfortunately, there would be a lot of anger online. I think there's anger already online at this early in the morning. I think it's within Celtic's best interest today to have an absolute stormer of a last 12 or so hours of the transfer window, just to quell those embers and the frustration and anger that seems to be going on social media. It's been there for about a week now, maybe even a bit longer. But in order for them to calm that down, because there's no football to be played until after the international break now.
Oh God,
in order for those,
just reminded me another one of those international breaks. Utterly.
And there'll be nothing worse than Scotland coming up against Denmark. Who just got called up for Denmark? Kasper Dolberg. So he'll be playing against Scotland later on this week. So that could be
competitive games, friendlies, whatever.
World Cup qualifiers, Kevin.
I mean, bring back.
It's not the Nations League, so we don't need to worry about that. But I realise we've been on for nearly 47 minutes. Now. It's been a longer show.
Who's Scotland playing?
Denmark and Belarus, I believe. They're in a group with Denmark, Belarus and Greece as well, who look like a really solid outfit. So it's going to be a tough task. Kieran Tierney and Anthony Ralston were both called up for Steve Clarke's squad. A lot of ex-Celtic players in that squad as well, so something to look out for in the days and week ahead. I realise we've been on for 47 minutes now, Kevin. It was always going to be a longer show given the subject matter of talking about the Glasgow Derby and talking about Celtic's transfer deadline day. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else that you want to add before we head off this morning?
No, I think I've probably said too much. Right.
Don't worry about it. It's better saying too much than not enough, that is for sure. Thank you so much for coming on. If you want to support us, guys, and we appreciate absolutely everybody that's been on this morning, if you want to support us just that little bit more, we are currently offering £1 for 6 months of access on the website. All you need to do is go to www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. If you subscribe today, you'll also receive a free Kieran Tierney print from renowned football artist made by Frankie. As I said, all you need to do, all the terms and conditions are on www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. So get involved, guys. We've worked with Made by Frankie on a number of occasions. This is a new great print from her. So yeah, get involved, guys. £1 for 6 months. Get all your transfer news for the next 2 transfer windows, both this one and the one in January, by subscribing to the Celtic Way. Thank you to each and every one of you for joining us. Just a quick reminder, transfer window shuts at 11 o'clock tonight in Scotland. We're not sure about the time yet that we'll be doing the live show, John and I, but we will be live later on to sort of dissect and discuss the transfer window as a whole. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on this morning. Really appreciate it. Fingers crossed it's a busy day, both in terms of incomings and outgoings. And yeah, we'll see you all later. Have a very good day, guys.